Hi, this is Alejandro Perez Perez, and this is the AI Coffee Podcast. Every week, you will have one disruptive aspect of technology and artificial intelligence for the time you drink a cup of coffee. Today, we have the honor of having Jean-Bernard Perron. He is the COO and CFO of Botpress, and he has a lot of insights about chatbots, AI, and running a tech company. So, welcome, GB. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
As I said, Jean-Bernard Perron, or GB for this interview, as his friends know him, is the COO and the CFO of Botpress, a leading platform specializing in AI-driven chatbots. He has a passion for practical AI applications, particularly LLMs and generative AI. Wow, Jean or GB, you have such an amazing profile. But before we start talking about chatbots, AI, and other, let's say, technical and professional things,
Yeah.
I would like you to explain one relevant thing because as I was reading on your LinkedIn profile, I saw something really funny. At the end of your bio, you said that people can connect with you for talking about Hawaiian shirts. And now I see you wearing a very beautiful shirt. So, can you explain why do you like this kind of shirts or why they are relevant for you?
Uh, well, it's people ask me that all the time, and it's funny because it never meant to be a thing, right? It kind of became a thing. You buy a first one, right, and people comment just like, "JB, that's a bit of a funky shirt," and like I think I might have been 17 or 18 at the time. I did work in banking previously, so sometimes I would even wear like these funky shirts under a suit in a bank, which was a bit like risky. But like maybe 6 years later, 7 years later, suddenly my whole wardrobe is just like I realize it's all short sleeve Hawaiian shirts, and basically I have enough shirts to last me a month now. So it's somehow it happened, and it never meant to be a thing, but it's definitely something a lot of people know me for.
It's really interesting because I promised that when I was preparing the questions, I saw this to be relevant. And now, when I see you directly with this shirt, I was thinking, yeah, I need to ask that at the beginning.
No, that's that's a fair question. Sometimes, on some board meetings, sometimes I'm wondering, like, is this fine? But I think the even though we're based out of Montreal, like being a San Francisco style startup, the dress code is very casual, right? Like a lot of people are wearing flip flops all the time. So thank God I'm out of banking and into the startup space because it's now I don't even have to apologize. It's just like fine. He's a bit eccentric. He might have something interesting to say. So it's no longer a quirk. I think it's just it's fine.
This is pretty nice. And actually, let's start talking a bit about you, because well, you are the CFO and COO, which are usually boring roles, let's say, with a lot of numbers, a lot of finance part. So, also, you mentioned that you worked before in banks. So, can you explain when was the moment where you started thinking about AI, thinking about chatbots, thinking about Botpress, and why are you there?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I mean, the answer might disappoint people. Like I'm not this massive technologist, but basically, one of my good friends, the founder of this company, Sylvain, called me up when I was at that moment. I was living in Switzerland, uh, getting into like investment banking and things like that. So a lot of sell side roles is kind of like what I was looking at. It's my forte. And yeah, he reached out. He told me about the Botpress, right? This company he had just started. At that point in 2018, it was him and four other developers, basically in a garage or like in a very small space. I think it was 1,000 square feet. Just like not, and somehow those four devs, like who had never sold anything in their lives, had just landed a Fortune 500 company. And then he called me up and he's like, "Hey, how can we sell this to other Fortune companies?" Right? Like, so he had built Botpress, an open source project at that point, and like was trying to figure out how we can commercialize. So at that point, he just sold like a support package, and I was like, how did they pull it off? Like, it's almost like they willed it into existence, right? I remember like they were still going through due diligence as they onboarded with the client, and there's a 350 point questionnaire about cybersecurity, and it's like at that point, like you kind of have to figure it out pretty quickly. But like 6 years later, like now, like I feel like I know a lot about info security. It's been such a a long time, but yeah, he basically impressed the shoes off of me and completely changed the trajectory of my life. I had never planned to get into this, but like I'm glad I did.
It's very interesting. I'm very honest what you say, because you could say something like, I discovered that AI and technology was my dream at that time. But well, no, it's true that sometimes you have just a friend, and this friend has a passion, and you want to help him, and you are here. So yeah, really interesting. And how is it to be a COO or a CFO of a tech company like Botpress? How is like a day in your life, for example?
Well, I never set out to carry those letters or to be COO slash CFO. It kind of started like I came in, was doing some sales, right? Like, not really putting my title in the email, because at that point we were trying to make, we didn't want people to know we're just five people, right? Like, so like the things you do, right? Thinking that you're convincing or whatnot. But I think with LinkedIn, we weren't fooling anybody. But somehow it gave us the confidence to be talking to these massive government agencies and Fortune companies. But, and then like the responsibilities grew over time. So like with the first clients, we didn't even have a support team. So then I started doing some level one support as well, just to do some basic troubleshooting. So then like obviously, like as I took on some of these responsibilities, understood what we needed to do, then that gave me a good idea of how who we needed to hire, right? So kind of learning exactly what the role is. So when we started, everyone was kind of a consultant because we hadn't set up uh, like the proper paperwork and entities. So then like I got us incorporated, I got us like on payroll provider, like some of those responsibilities. I used to keep the books for my dad's small company when I was a kid, so like I knew a lot about bookkeeping and like tax law and stuff like that. And then also, I have a minor in accounting as well, so it's not so taking on a lot of things. And like when your number one skill is figuring things out and learning really quickly, your responsibilities grow really quickly. But honestly, like the title is just that, right? It's just because I sign a lot of paperwork. I do work in official capacity as an observer to the board, like like telling them like what revenue have we hit and whatnot. But yeah, it's right now most of my concerns are go to market, right? Like how do we stand out in this market? How do we do better marketing, right? Like how do we do better sales? Like how do we uh, like what features would drive stuff? So like most of my efforts are exactly where they should be in core functions, which is basically go to market. But then like the back office, I've hired a good team behind me, right? Like I don't do all this stuff anymore, but I've found a knack for hiring people who are way better at me at the things we need to do.
It's very important when you mention to have a really a good back office working for you, and I think this is a good point actually. So how many people do Botpress have nowadays?
I believe, I mean, we've hired a lot of people recently. I believe we're 47 or 48. So obviously, we have like very ambitious growth plans in the next couple months, next 12 months. It's going to be fun to see the answer to that question is in 6 months. But yeah, I think we've added like 15 people in just the last 4 months. So it's been a good ride.
It's very nice that you are growing so much. And I have a question. It was supposed to be a little bit later on the interview,
Sure.
but I saw recently that Botpress actually was growing a lot actually during the last summer. As a Botpress user, I was a little bit surprised because you were coming with a lot of integrations, a lot of new tools. Actually, even I think today a new thing appeared. I mean, really a lot of things coming. So, are you growing Botpress because of the maybe competitors, the pressure of the market, or how do you? Why do you grow so much?
Well, I mean that I think there's multiple thoughts I have to that to that, right? Like, so I'll share a couple of those thoughts, but just like, there's many reasons, right? But to us, like, growth is just kind of the trajectory we set on. Like, philosophically, we didn't get into this market to be like a niche player, right? Sylvain's ambition has always been very bold and very grandiose, and that's why I joined, right? So for us, like, to not be growing would be just like, uh, it's like resisting this compelling urge we have. Like, we get out of bed with this idea that, hey, we're going to build the next Shopify in Canada, right? Like, it's extremely, it's just nature, right? It's just like who we are. But other than that, it's just like AI to me is the biggest trend right now since the internet, right? Like, and maybe it's even bigger than the internet, right? Like, joke is, right, like, this market is going to be very large, right? Like, I don't think we're going to own like all of it, but like if we own like a decent chunk, like it's going to be definitely very interesting, right? um so yeah, like, obviously, I think this might be the single most competitive market in SaaS since I can't remember like a market like this. I'm someone who's in finance, so I used to look up the markets, like companies coming to IPO, going Series D. So I really am interested in funding. Like, I remember there was an RPA craze like 6 years ago where UiPath and Automation Anywhere were kind of having a moment, but that was like nothing compared to this, right? Like, looking at those balloon valuation of some of those foundation model providers, both in the US and some in France, right? Like, Cohere in Toronto. It's mind boggling, right? Just because people will just want a slice of it. So, and obviously, all the players in the agent space, specifically to us, like, they're not slowing down, right? Like, they see what we're seeing. So, but for us, we've set out on a journey with a roadmap. We first experienced like the power of GPT all the way back in 2021, I think it was. At that point, we had built a bot for COVID. Like, I hate to bring it up because like I erase that moment in history from my memory as much as I can, but that bot was handling massive volumes if it's for the government of Quebec. And the problem we had is the information would change really quickly, right? They would change up the measures, like where you can go and stuff like that. So if you're familiar with traditional chatbot technology, like, basically everything is a set of intent, right? It's an intent classifier. Then you have to change all your responses, and it's kind of stiff, right? Like, the questions change, but also the answers change, right? So like maintaining that became a bit of a clusterfuck, right? Like, I think that's what happened with Air Canada when like their source of truth came out of sync with like what the bot was saying, right? So then they they got sued, and like this was a big story in Canada maybe like 6 7 months ago. But the point being, like, uh, went on this journey to GPT, and we're like, we need to make it not just an FAQ system, but also intertwine it into every system, right? Have it take actions, and then the AI agents became a thing, but that was always the vision, right? Going beyond like customer support and FAQs and just going into systems, automating, and they don't necessarily need to be chatbots, right? So for us, it doesn't feel like we've moved a lot from our vision since we first experienced LLMs all the way back. So we had built OpenBook that year, which was like a RAG based system. It just did FAQ at that point, right? Like, and that's before people like, we're always talking about RAG, right? But people want to do more than that, right? So like, RAG is just one phase, and then the next phase is just like using that information to be like, hey, let's update a record in the CRM, right? Like, let's send a proactive message to the director that someone needs access to something, right? Like orchestrating, automating, just going way beyond like just the classical customer support and ITSM use cases everyone's familiar with.
Mhm. Actually, small information for the audience that maybe is not familiar with. Actually, Botpress, which I mean, I use Botpress with some customers as a freelance, and most of them what they want is a RAG, actually, which is a kind of ChatGPT based on their own knowledge. Just is like a small definition for
Yeah,
everyone. And the important thing is that you can create easily with, let's say, a low code or no code platform, a chatbot where you can interact too and actually get answers from a specific, for example, with a book or specific papers or information or their own website of the company or something like that. So it's not like using ChatGPT, for instance. So it's more like a very specific and customized bot and let's say much easier than using directly code, which is usually very hard and very and also changing very fast because, as you mentioned, AI is something growing, changing quickly. So this is why I think Botpress is leading. Actually, to be honest, I haven't invited you because I wanted. It's because it's like I think it's like really Botpress is leading at this moment. Yeah, congratulations. Well, this is my opinion. I don't know if it's like all opinions, but I have tested some of your competitors, and at this time, I prefer Botpress. So yeah. So mm, talking about Botpress a little bit more. Also, for giving a context to the audience, because maybe this podcast is going to be listened for people 2 years later, let's say. So now we are recording this. It's September 2024. So, how do you see the company, the future of the company, maybe in 5 years?
that's a picky one. Because like one thing I've learned about the last 2 years is like this industry has been shifting really quickly, right? Like right now I'm in month to month mode. We do have this like comprehensive roadmap of where we want to go with the platform, but it's there's no question that like uh, it's going to be like there's going to be like some elements to this where which are not so bright, right? Like in 5 years, I do think this is going to automate a lot of work, right? So I think like there's going to be a lot of like trying to, uh, and I don't think people are going to end up without jobs. Like I'm not one of those people. Like I think people will just do higher skill jobs, right? Like maybe more creative or more like I think we always evolve, and but it's definitely like you're not going to see these massive contact centers. Like it's just not going to be a thing, right? So yeah, it's gonna be a lot of hopefully Botpress is the standard. So you brought up a point that we're leading. So I mean 500,000 people have experienced Botpress since we relaunched last year. So um, I tend to believe that's a decent amount of people who agree with you, but we basically are focused on getting the most market share we can because we do think there's going to be a massive AI consolidation wave, right? Right now, if I look at the chatbot, like Gen 1 chatbots, conversational AI platforms, like legacy tools, even all the way back to contact center tools and all those things, right? Like that promise this like decision tree AI based or whatever it may be. And not all of it LLM based, a lot of it like LLMs coming in as an afterthought. Like not every platform had the luxury of being like Botpress. Let's just re-engineer this thing. This needs to be LLM native, right? Um, so I can't see this market not consolidating massively. It's untenable to have 10,000 vendors, right? There needs to be a standard. I think like the future is probably like a lot of freelancers and agencies driving it, right? A lot of our deployments right now, like I would say more than half, are being dealt with by partners and stuff like that. So our model is partner first, right? Like we're not doing services ourselves. Like we do training, right? Obviously to teach people how to, but like just the global scale of this. Right now, we're doing a lot of business in LATAM, a lot of business in APAC, which is kind of surprising because we don't have anyone there. But that's maybe how good the tool is and how multilingual the underlying foundation models are by default. So we didn't have to go through this whole thing of like localizing everything. It's just how good these models are. They're already global in reach, right? They already speak like these languages of Central Asia and Africa and whatnot. So obviously, they're only going to get better, but it's given us a reach on a global scale. Like we have deployments. I believe in the other day I made a post about it. Something like 200 countries, and I didn't even know there was 200 countries. So I was telling people like we have one last holdout, and obviously there was a couple more, but the Vatican didn't sign up, and they still haven't. So if they're listening, maybe maybe they can sign up, and like I can stop talking about it. But yeah, um, I forgot what I started saying, but yeah, it's really hard to forecast the future. I'm really focused on the next months, the next quarters, but obviously, yeah, we want to get the biggest slice of it that we can, and that's by like delivering and engineering as quickly as you can, building a world class sales organization, and obviously, a big core thesis of us is like doing it in Canada, right? So,
Yeah, it's true that with AI, this world is changing very, very quickly. We are in a liquid world, let's say, with even, I mean, every week we have a new thing coming. So, yeah, I get the point that it's very, very difficult to forecast, even in a week, maybe sometimes. So, maybe you mentioned that you are doing a lot of effort on teaching and being honest. I would say that I would like completely agree with you because what I see the most valuable from Botpress, and you're not paying me for saying so, even though it looks like, but it's not. It's like you have a very powerful community on Discord that I think it's very relevant for developers actually, and you are doing a lot of effort on really helping others because for example, a couple of days ago, I posted a question there because I had a doubt about one integration. I don't even remember, but I had a doubt. And Robert, your colleague, I think like two, three
yeah.
hours later, responded me directly, and it was like, wow, you are really doing a lot of effort on forming others or on really um, yeah, powering other people, your partners, the developers, also to be able to deliver good solutions. That I guess that at the end of the day, this is what you need to have good examples, good demos, and good chatbots everywhere. Yeah. What do you think about that? Anything to
Well,
say?
I mean, I think as you try to build a moat, right, like defensibility, like a palisade around your SaaS offering, um, the community is a big one, right? Like the community is a big strength of ours. And I've thought about this, and I think there's multiple reasons why that is, right? So I think first and foremost, as we were doing the first couple months, it immediately was clear that there was a lot of value. Because think of all those vendors that like it's get a demo, right? You go to their website, you can't try this thing. It's like, no, it works. Look at this scripted demo of LLMs, right? I mean, I think the market has moved beyond that. Obviously, there's still some holdout boomers out there, like looking at the magic quadrant, but I think like PLG has really revolutionized a lot of industries, and people actually want to do it themselves and know that it works, and it's not just a smoke show being put on by the solution engineering team. Uh, so having a massive Discord community is very early feedback because if you think of an enterprise, which Botpress has been like a big enterprise player for years, right? Like we started enterprise, and this foray into PLG, pay as you go, is a very recent turn of events for us, right? So in the past, we strictly worked with larger companies. Uh, so what we learned about that is that we actually get way more feedback way more quicker. Like smaller deployments move quicker, they move the needle, they're more willing to take risks, be creative. So like every part of Botpress has been like massively battle tested, right, to be super robust compared to some of our competitors, right? Like every section of the software has been at least used like hundreds of thousands of times, right? So I think that's a big strength. So product feedback. Second one is like a roster. So what I mean by roster is basically a lot of our clients, they want to know that they're buying the standard, right? They don't want to think that like if you think of an industry like RPA, I brought about it. Why people buy UiPath if they're in the market for RPA is because they know there's a lot of people with UiPath certifications, right? They know that if they need to staff a team to start building RPA, like UiPath is going to be the one where they can staff a lot of people, right? Like companies like TCS, like Tata, and like Capgemini, like these big IT providers, Accenture, like have rosters of 1,000 people building on UiPath. So we're currently building that. But if you go to Upwork or Fiverr, or you go to there's another one that we also I know there's a couple of users on it, builders on it that like post jobs, right? So one of the best bots I saw actually was kind of making me laugh the other day, because the guy was like, he's based out of India, and he built a bot for $200, and it's really good. Like it's actually above average. Like I've seen bots that people have spent 50K on the services, and we're nowhere as good. So it's really democratizing the talent for larger customers to be able to say like, hey, if I adopt Botpress, I don't like this agency, I can find another one. I can find a freelancer if my budget doesn't permit it, right? Because even us at our stage, we use a lot of freelancers sometimes in marketing if we don't want to do a full-time employee to do some things, right? And that's how a lot of people think about it. So and yeah, so the roster is really important, and then obviously it's also democratizing support on our platform. Obviously we are way past the point where we can answer everyone's question, right? Like you probably notice, it's like I wish we could. uh, for context, I think there's probably 100 questions being asked on a daily basis there, and like some of them go really deep, right? So like not all questions are just like, hey, how do you start the bot, right? Like I think we've gone way beyond that. So it's good to see that a lot of the questions are actually community answered. I think those are like the big three reasons. I think like community is a big strength, and helps us bring this vision of being a standard, right? Like being a standard in the market. Um, yeah, I hope that makes sense. But yeah, I feel very strongly about a community. I think it's given us a lot. Obviously, it's taken a lot, and like there's been some growing pains maybe 12 months ago, but like right now, I think we're in a really good spot.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you are. And yeah, I'm also a freelance, as I said. I think I said already a couple of times, but yeah, it's good to repeat it. If someone needs help with chatbots, I'm here. And one question, because I think you wrote something today, I think, or you shared something on LinkedIn even today. But
Yeah.
I think this is related to a term that I think I have read a lot of times on LinkedIn and internet, that maybe part of the audience have read also. Which are the difference between chatbots, AI agents? I mean, all these terms. I mean, which are the difference, or are they really the same? What's your opinion?
Uh, I think I think the market is converging on an answer of it, right? Like in the North American and European crowd, maybe converging quicker, but for sure having a global audience, like I think there's a lot of people using those words interchangeably, and uh, one of the things I think is kind of gaining acceptance is that chatbots are like mostly FAQ based, right? Simpler in nature. It doesn't mean there's no LLM, right? But it does mean that maybe it doesn't take action. So I think what separates an agent is the text to action component, which is where you take whatever's having in the conversation, structure that data to do something in systems of records, or to erase something in a cart, right? Like I think it's taking the text from the human language, and then doing something that would have been only possible through a UI in the past, and now it's like it's way more accessible, right? How many websites are so hard to navigate, right? Like I wish I could go to Amazon and just be like, add this to my cart, like, and then it would actually work, right? Like not like Alexa, right? I think the Alexa skill for Amazon shopping is a good idea, but the technology was too early. But once it actually works and understands the nuance and is able to understand like the value proposition of those products and what makes them good and which ones have better reviews, which one is the best price, but also deliver personalized experiences. So I think AI agents is just going beyond and taking action. It would be the big differentiator for me. But like in some markets, people just use the word AI chatbot. But yeah, AI agents is definitely like gaining a lot of traction really quickly if you look at Google Trends and stuff like that. But we've always had this vision of being like, hey, let's have AI take action, right? Like put AI to work. Let's not just make this an FAQ system, because how are we different than search at that point, right? We don't want to just be a RAG system, right? I think that's a nice use case, because that's actually where clients are. But you also have to meet clients where they are, right? An automation journey to me starts in a very similar function. In most deployments, you start being like, hey, we can actually automate your FAQs, and that's maybe, depending on the business, 40 to 60% of the requests incoming. But then, like, if it's an e-commerce, you add cart management, right? Or you add product recommendation, you add loyalty program management. Suddenly, now you're at 70%. Those use cases are a bit like longer tail, a bit more work, but they're definitely worth it, because like order status use cases, like all those things are expected in this market. And I think with a very crowded market and people using those words interchangeably, I think it is extremely confusing to navigate for most customers. So there's a massive job of education, what's possible, who's also a smoke show, right? Like, I am of the opinion that a lot of these vendors get a demo, a complete smoke shows, complete house of cards. Like, it's good to work in a scripted demo environment, but like I would challenge them to actually open it up and have people sample it. But they don't, right? So they want to curate the experience, but hey, like only time will tell which version is better. But I feel very strongly about this.
Mhm. Yeah, I see that now. If you launch a product and you use the term AI, of course, you are everywhere and everyone talks about you. But yeah, this is why maybe, I mean, I was curious about that because for me they are the same, because chatbots now they are supposed to have AI integrated. I mean, why not? And so AI agents, more or less, why not? They are, for me they are more or less the same, or basically the same. I don't know. Maybe
I
yeah.
think I
Let's see.
think I think it's definitely something to be careful with. I think some people do have a negative connotation to chatbots, because I've been in this industry prior to LLMs, and like suddenly this industry is cool, right? It didn't used to be. For a second there, like I would tell people what I do for a living, and then tell me, "Oh, are those annoying things in the bottom right corner?" Right?
Mhm.
Because they're super scripted. Like sometimes they didn't even have, like sometimes they weren't even chatbots. Like the chat field was disabled, so then you had like to go through this linear path, and all it was just a lead gen bot that was a button based thing, which is like a complete travesty of what like a chatbot was supposed to be. Like they removed the chat component of it. It's like, so people got super annoyed at these things, right? Like it was almost like people felt like there was a snake oil component to chatbots. So like I do think there is a curative aspect, right? Like it does heal the industry to move towards AI agents, but like I don't think this word necessarily will have global reach. I think in different countries, like some people still use the word chatbox, for example. And it's, I mean, what is that? Or like automated live chat, right? Like, so you need to meet the customers where they are. But yeah, and some people mean other things by AI agents, right? Like there's some use cases that like on chain that I'm not really sure like what to make of them. So it's worth asking a second question. What do you mean by that? What are your expectations? What are exactly are you trying to do? But I think at the end of the day, the broader category is probably AI automation or business process optimization or something like that, right? That's the broader umbrella, because as you move beyond these chat first kind of reactive frameworks where you're initiating a conversation because you have a need, you could also have a chatbot that's just like processing data in real time and then sending a notification to the director in Slack to say like, hey, this thing is happening, we've processed these conversations and you got a hit, right? So uh, we're going to see way more people doing like outbound with this, and also proactive like monitoring use cases. So one of the bots that people are not aware we have a bot that analyzes every message on Discord and basically analyzes trends and categorizes through LLMs to see like, hey, so for example, and if you've been on your Discord, you would know, like for the same feature request there might be 10, right, like different threads, but it's essentially the same thing. So we're basically categorizing, so at any moment we have a very clear idea of what is the community most wanting, right? What is the thing that comes up the most, but not only in the feature request but in the main chat, in the developer channel, in the help channel, because a lot of people are asking for help for something that doesn't exist, right? But they want it. So yeah, it allows us to really have an ear on the without having to read every message, which would be like an impossible task for a human.
Mhm. It's very interesting. I think you have a lot of things still to work on because, of course, as you mentioned, there's like thousands of new integrations that could be done. Also, new things come in. But yeah, I guess that you are working in the right directions because, as I mentioned in the last months, I mean, I saw that you changed a lot. Actually, I forgot to mention that you are working now with autonomous chatbots, which I think is very new and very also, let's say, risky. Maybe I don't know if it's risky. Maybe you can tell me something about that. But it depends on the company. Maybe you are using the chatbot or working for. It could be different because there is another. It's another concept, as you mentioned. It's not the same kind of chatbots where you have an structure. I mean, you ask something, then if something, then you do that, and it was very classical oriented. Now with this new idea, I think you let the the control directly to the AI to manage the process. So maybe if a customer arrives with a really quick question or like a very quick thing, the chatbot directly works directly, or maybe it could be little by little selling the product or answering things. So wow, this is very nice, but yeah, a new concept maybe coming. Yeah, maybe this is more the rebranding, as you said about chatbots. This is the new type of chatbots that are going to arrive new nowadays, rather than the old ones. Well, of course, I remember. Please press one when you were calling, for example, to a public administration. Please press one if you need this, or please press two. And of course, we are all, I think, a little bit tired of this kind of chatbots or bots. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
chatbot fatigue is definitely a thing. Um, I like the autonomous node is basically what gets me out of bed recently. It's there's a core problem with like bridging the gap because if you take a raw LLM, right, like you just look at GPT by default, it tries to answer everything, right? And I think the term hallucination has become like a catch-all term to mean so many things. And it's anytime it says something it's not supposed to, basically at this point, when like initially I think it was more of an academic term to mean like specifically making it up, right? Like but saying something that doesn't exist. But the big problem is that then you create these issues of control, right? So then big brands, especially upmarket and the enterprise, they're like, well, how do I make sure it doesn't start disparaging my brand? So I remember famously, maybe 12 months ago, there was a Chevrolet dealership that they started selling their cars for $1 and they started like propping up like Tesla cars, right? Like, and I was like, wow, you really need to like sandbox this thing, right? And that's not new, right? Like that was always understood to be the problem from the moment you experience LLMs. If you've been in this market and you've been in enterprise software, you understand that that's the core philosophy. The problem is you then turn into risk management mode. But then there's the dichotomy is like you could banalize it totally and go back to an intent classifier, which is more controllable, but then it's not as great, right? So you really have to, and I think there was also a problem of token consumption and the speed of models, right? 12 months ago, I would have told you the autonomous engine is not possible because it's too slow, right? It's doing multiple trips. Time to first token matters, like how much time it takes to process the token. So I think the first model that really got our engine going was like 4.0 mini. It works really good. It works well with 4.0. But even GPT-4, I find it like for a support context, it's a bit slow, right? Like it's not something you want to use. Obviously, we also support the Grok models, which are like blazing fast, which just shows you like that's also a concern. But this notion of control, I think we got exactly right with the autonomous node, right? Like everything in Botpress is context aware. Like the tool calling, it understands like what's its domain specific. It's like, hey, I'm not going to answer questions outside of this. We as you know, Botpress is a bit of an agentic system where, like, before the message go out, they're reprocessed by a bunch of things. So one of those is the policy agent, which you can also do to, like, even if it shouldn't by default do that, but if all things fail, the policy agent's going to catch it and be like, no, this is like disparaging us or whatnot. So, like, there's a lot of things you can do that are very obvious to make these right. But for us, it's like we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just making it accessible, right? Like all these things and making sure our software is understood by GPT, right? Which allows us to, like, call our own stuff, right? Like every schema in Botpress is super well understood by uh, the LLM, which is what makes it so works so out of the box. So this is going to be a complete game changer, that you're going to go from this moment where people were mapping out every customer story through a flow-based diagram to just basically configuring a bot, going from a wizard and just saying like, hey, you're going to be deployed on these channels, you're going to do these use cases, and this is within your realm of control, and all you have to do is basically configure your channels, set up your personality, right? Like make sure it's on brand, and then boom, right? So you're reducing time to value tremendously, and like it feels like less of an onerous task of just like mapping out these flows. Because the problem with these flow systems, I always thought like I think a lot of people mistake it. They think the problem is building them, which I agree is a massive and odious task to do. But the actual real problem is to maintain it, right? You want to change something, it's like you have to dig deep, right? Like go into your flow chart and just like, oh, I need to change this thing, and it becomes very stiff and very hard to maintain. And that's what I always found to be like a way bigger challenge than actually building the initial thing, which is, I would agree, a big lift. So yeah, to me, like the future is autonomous, the future is configuration, and then also still having the initial tooling, which is a more controlled and linear aspect. So, for example, you could have a context where you have a sales lead and you don't want to move out of this like very linear thing where you want to collect that email or you want to bring that conversation to the next step, right? You don't want to backtrack on that. So there's moments where you want like specific payloads to come in or messages to come in, and I think that's where you still want it. But you really need to mix and match when you're like going linearly and when you're falling back. But yeah, I'm obviously very excited about the tech. Like I've built a couple bots internally just for myself. Like we our HR policies, all that infosec. So whenever we're filling up an infosec, we feed it all the questions, and then it just maps with all our data stuff, like basically all the policies for infosec, and it knows the answers. It knows what it is, because if you've been using Botpress, we also quote where the answer was found, right? So if it doesn't know where to find it, it just doesn't answer. But then it tells you, hey, I got it on this page of this document, which is right. Like you want to make sure to just didn't pull it up from the internet, right? Or make it up. So yeah, it's so useful, and yet like I'm like my solution engineering team is just 5 people and we find a lot of value into it. So like the possibilities of these bots that are easier and quicker to build just makes it that like the number of use cases has just exponentially grown over the last couple months.
Yep. Wow. Uh, Jan, we are running out of time because I think we have talked a lot, and it's really very nice actually because I think you have said a lot of very insightful things. But I have one question that I think is very relevant for finishing this episode. Uh, which advice would you tell maybe a freelancer that wants to start working with Botpress or chatbots or AI nowadays? Do you have any to this kind of person?
Yeah, I do, because I've spoken to like maybe a couple hundred freelancers and agencies over just the last couple months. To me, the ones that kill it, right? The ones that really make a killing are specialized, right? Specialization is key, right? Like we have some that do like healthcare, right? They go after a niche, they build a clean prototype, they go in and it's like, hey, can I get your time? I'm going to show you something that's going to blow your mind, right? Like people who have a repeatable business and a niche, And then actually, I don't think like that means you're stuck there forever. I think that's the concern people have with being a niche. It's like, well, then I can't grow. Well, no, you grow by doing another niche, right? Or doing parallel use cases that are related to the initial one, right? I find that that is the key. And the niche could also be like a specialization on specific aspects of Botpress. So a lot of the freelancers that are having a good time right now in Botpress are pro integration builders. They're very solicited because like people obviously we don't support every system in the world, but our APIs make it possible. So all that's missing, and people might not know Botpress, but like we host the middleware for the integrations, which make it really accessible for us to like have an end-to-end experience connected into any system, any channel, and we have a whole SDK to build integrations and a bunch of videos there. And like obviously, it's a bit more technical than building bots themselves, but some people are specialized there, right? So there's also since actually 2 weeks ago, I believe we soft released the Card Hub, which allows people to share pre-built skills that people can use, right? And I do think like the next generation of maybe specialists on our platform will get their notoriety because everything that's built within our hub is linked to the initial profile of the builder. So people tend to reach out to those builders because they're like, hey, like this guy has built like 1,000 cards. He must know what he's doing. So we've actually passed like a very historic moment, maybe 2 months ago, where our hub is now majority community built. So we used to build most of the integrations, and we still build a bunch, but there's actually more community built ones now. So that's pretty exciting, and I think it's only exponential from here, right? Like, who knows, right? Like, so yeah. I hope that answers the question, but like I think that's the answer to a lot of questions in life. Like people don't specialize enough. Like they want to keep the doors open, but yet like nailing a niche, having something you understand well. Like if, for example, I was to become a freelancer on Botpress, uh, I think I'd probably do something in banking and finance, mortgage, or KYC because it's something I deeply understand. Right? Like I used to underwrite write 5 mortgages a day when I was 22, so uh, I know something about inefficient process that could be totally done by an agent, right? So I think that's where I would start, right? Like I know a couple of people, right? But yeah, for sure, find your niche.
Hmm. I think it's a very good advice. I take note of that. But I think, yeah, it's very relevant even out of and beyond Botpress and chatbots. Specialization is usually very necessary in this world where you can do many, many different things. And I completely agree. And I would add just a small thing is that also personal brand or personal, yes,
Yeah, sure.
communication is usually also very useful. At least in my opinion. Yeah. Okay, so we are finishing. Thank you very much. I have two questions because at the end of every episode, I ask two different things that I think are very necessary. The first thing is how can the audience contact you? Because maybe they have questions, they have new ideas for Botpress, for yourself, for your shirts, who knows? And then also, which is your favorite type of coffee? Because you know this is the AI Coffee podcast. We all love coffee. So yeah, can you share also your favorite type?
Yeah. So first question, I guess, LinkedIn, right? Like I do audit my DMs, and like a lot of people do reach out to me. So I've been trying to be a bit more active there. So initially in the past, I kind of live in my basement. I'm not a very social media person by nature, but like that has changed, and like I do audit it, and I try to be active there. And then in terms of coffee, I mean that's a core question because to me, I don't trust someone who tells me they don't drink coffee. Like it's like you like coffee. Like I ask that of new hires, and then like whenever someone tells me like I don't drink coffee, I'm like, man, it's just weird, bizarre thing.
Weird.
We actually have a Jura coffee maker in the office, which is a really high quality coffee. And having been in Switzerland, like I used to hike the Jura mountains all the time. So I don't know. It makes excellent coffee. We have a lot of Colombian grain that we buy, and it's nice, right? Like it makes a very strong coffee. So I don't know if you know a bit, but like in North America, coffee's weak, right? Like I
Yes.
remember when I moved to Switzerland in 2017, I had my first coffee and I was kind of like dizzy. I was like, what the fuck is happening? Because I used to drink like 2, 3 in the morning, like these watered down American coffees. And then like I started having like some proper Swiss coffees and I'm like Italian style. And I'm like, what is happening? I was shaking like this. And now like I have a fine taste for like good, like strong coffee. And I think the coffee culture has gotten better in this country. Like, for example, Starbucks is having a miserable time in Montreal, just like a lot of local coffee shops. And I love to see it. Like just beside the office, there's like four really nice ones. And I can't say enough good things about coffee.
Yeah, I agree with you that if you like coffee, maybe dark coffee is better. But of course, we do all love diversity, and we appreciate people who loves coffee. We do not the ones that don't like coffee. Of course, I agree with you. Uh, it doesn't matter which kind of coffee you like. This is fine. This is great. Okay, Jean, thank you very much for your time. I think now we have talked about many different things, even coffee. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Alejandro.
And also, thank you to you that you are watching until the end this episode. It's been a pleasure being with you one more week. If you have questions, you can write on comments and also like the episode or the video if you liked it. And see you next time. Bye bye.